Good evening. Thank you for your patience. This is 2-on-1, a theological pop culture conversation or a pop cultured theological conversation between myself, the Reverend Arthur Stewart, and the Reverend Stephanie Kendall, and the one.
Sorry, it's Dr. Clara Mandrake.
Excuse me, Dr. Clara Mandrake and Johnny Rose. And joining us this week from Geist Christian Church in Indianapolis is the Reverend Danny Gulden, who's slumming it as David, and we're so thrilled. We're so thrilled you're here. Would you like to introduce yourself further? I know you're the lead pastor at Geist, but you want to tell us some fun things about yourself?
Yeah, fun things. Probably the most fun thing is I have sung karaoke to Michael Jackson's "Beat It" at the halftime of a professional hockey game at one of the intermissions. So that was awesome. Probably the other. I blog at dannygulden.com and like to write there, and love the church, lifelong disciple, and just thrilled to be here and thrilled to get to portray David Rose today. Just to have David Rose, just to wear a sweater that's dark and then white stripes. Normally I don't wear this, but just
I wear
to
this
be
all the time, so
Yes.
I don't. This is my day to day.
I need to earn the doctorate that Dr. Clara Mandrake has, though.
Same.
Clearly Johnny above us. So, but great to be here.
We're so glad that you are here. For those of you...
Yeah.
Oh, no, please.
Go ahead.
No,
I was going to say, so we're talking Schitt's Creek today, and one of the reasons that, Danny caught my eye is that he had posted about Schitt's Creek, and so I was like, I know exactly who we can bring on, which is one of those things that if you follow us on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram at 2-on-1 Project, you can see all of the things that we are talking about, and if you talk about pop culture, there's a real good chance that one of us may pop over and invite you into this conversational space, and if we don't see it and don't do that, here's your invitation now. So hit us up at 2on1project at gmail. Let us know. We have a lot of great people coming up, but just wanted to be like, that's kind of how this is all happening, right? It's really wonderful ways in which we get to continuously connect with each other and talk about things that are fun.
and you may think like, I want to talk about some obscure 70s cartoon show. We'll find it. We'll watch it with you. Okay, so Danny, you are joining us today for the second part of our Schitt's Creek conversation, and it is before and it is after the Emmys. So before we get into all of this, first of all, couldn't have been a better Emmys period for the show. Secondly, why do you like Schitt's Creek? Like, who's your favorite character? What's your favorite episode? What made you stick?
Okay. Well, and I must say, I think all of our inspired dressing this week, we must give credit to Erin Wathen last week, who came and wore her plaid as Stevie Budd. And I think inspired all of us to kind of up our Rose dressing game for this week. So thanks to Erin.
This is all for Erin.
Yes. You inspired Dr. Clara Mandrake, Erin. Yeah, and the Emmys, I mean, what passion, what joy. I mean, did we not need some joy like that in 2020 of just watching the cast of Schitt's Creek celebrate and just what they had created, what they had done, the family, the community they had made. I mean, it was just joy, right? It's what we needed. And so I'm so glad that they all won. And for me, I actually had watched it through once. We went back and watched it through the original phases of COVID when we were sort of quarantined at home and didn't have much to do. And so we went back and watched Schitt's Creek. And really the episode that probably hooked me, especially the second time around, was actually the third episode in the series, the episode around the town sign. Because I was thinking about, at that point, church, what is church going to be like going forward? What does community look like going forward? And that episode around the town sign, I was like, if that's not an episode about church, I don't know what is, right? So that's kind of hooked me. Favorite character is so tough. I mean, if I had to pick one, it's probably David, just because David is such a light and a joy. And just you get to watch him figuring out what it really means to be him. I mean, I think that's true for all the characters, right? They start out sort of, you meet these people pining for their former lives, and that's their main is to just see, I think, David evolve and become the heart of the show. So, and Dan Levy just seems like in real life a lovely, lovely person that I think we'd all love to hang out with. So.
I agree. I don't know if y'all, I was on Twitter live tweeting the Emmys, and I just lost it when Moira won. First of all, really excited that like Best Female Comedy Actress was like the first thing, and so it was very much. I appreciated the way they modeled their understanding of how to come together as community. Right? They said they all took the test, they all got negative COVID tests, and then quarantined and came together, which I thought was just a really special time for them. But I just lost it. I watched and I was just like, I just started crying, and then I like David. So I kind of had a feeling that Catherine O'Hara would win. I thought Schitt's Creek would win for Best Comedy Show. The rest was kind of a little bit all up in the air. I did not expect Annie Murphy to win, like, at all. I thought that would be the one that was kind of the, like, not. And when she won, and Dan Levy's face of just joy, like, it was, he's jumping up and down. He's just everything. I was a bally mess. I had to like not record myself anymore because I was just like, this does not need to be on the internet. I don't know if this needs to be on the internet, but it is. But I was so excited to experience that joy with them in a community that has journeyed with us in COVID. For many of us has journeyed with COVID and offered spaces of joy during this really kind of unsettling time. So couldn't have been just more over the moon for all of it. And then it's a sweep was just lovely.
Yeah.
Just lovely.
So that leads into one of my questions, if I could, because I want to ask a question. So season 1, episode 3. For those of you who have not watched the show, I think we talked about it last week. You should watch that episode too. But essentially, a family that is very privileged, very rich, very hoity-toity, how do you do, with a lot of the stereotypes associated with it. Turns out they had a bad bookkeeper who was stealing from them. They owe the tax man everything. Everything gets stolen, or everything gets confiscated, except a small town that they bought for, for David, called Schitt's Creek. They end up moving there. It's rural, it's poor, it's laid back compared to the lifestyle that they're used to, and they have to acclimate. So the show, when it started, was very much, look at these jerks, they're fish out of water. It kind of felt that way a little bit. They wanted to sell the town and get rid of it. It was Stavros is going to come get me. I don't understand how much eye cream costs. And at the outskirts of the town is a sign for Schitt's Creek. And it is a man holding a woman by her waist, and she's bent over getting something out of the river. And it has very clear sexual connotations. And Johnny Rose wants to get rid of the sign. And that's basically the main plot of the episode. And I know there's a lot of church in it, Danny, and I'm not trying to give anything away, and I'm not trying to step on stuff. Would you tell me why you see a lot of church in there?
Well, for me, I think your summary is good of that, because I think one of the things about Schitt's Creek that's unique is the first few episodes are hard to get into because they're so unlikable, right? You have to set up that these characters are really unlikable people, right? And so it's hard to gravitate towards them. And that sign episode, I mean, I think it's so you described the sign very well. I was thinking, how are we going to describe this sign that's in a way that people get the picture, but also, you know, is good. And it reminds me of the church, because it's like you have these outsiders come in, right? You have a lot of people that have been in this town forever, have grown up here, have lived here, have driven past this sign, have never seen anything wrong with it. And you have this outsider who comes in, who they're in the process of welcome. You know, it's kind of like church. It's like, I'm not sure if I want to be here. We're not sure if we want you here. And then starts talking about clearly something wrong with this sign, right? There is something, and they just don't see it. I mean, they do not see it. And Johnny Rose is just beside himself that they can't understand the problem with the sign. And then finally, dear old Roland Schitt, right, you're such a good name, right? And he goes, oh, I see the problem with it. And Johnny's kind of like, finally, he's like, oh, that's his sister, not, and so it's like what he sees wrong with it makes it even worse than the initial problem. And so, that's where, for me, I was kind of like, oh my God, this is about, because how many times have, in the church, do we just sort of, especially those who have been in it most of our life, or those who are entrenched in it, we walk past something or we see something that's completely wrong every day, but we can't see it, right? And then someone from the outside comes in and says, hey, have you ever thought about? And so
it's tied to tradition, right? I mean, so part of what the sign is it's Roland's grandparents, and so there is an understanding that tradition, that to take away the sign, right? That looks like they're copulating in a river. But to the insiders, right? Those that live in Schitt's Creek, that's their history. And that is the people that founded it's Roland's literal grandparents. And so I think you're right. I rewatched that episode today and I thought, oh, this is very much church in the way in which there is a piece of history that lives in all of our communities that we know we should address and yet don't want to for lots of different reasons.
Right.
And so my question, do you have you want to go, Arthur? Or you want me?
No, I want you to go.
My question is there a space in which tradition becomes idolatry? That we are too tied into this thing because it's tradition, and look how great we have that, like the idolatry being our ability to maintain a tradition rather than what the tradition has set out to do in the first place.
Right.
So the sign being welcome, here's our people, here's who we are, the sign also says a place where everyone fits in, and it's meaning to say come, and yet it's clearly problematic for a lot of reasons.
Well, and that's a good, and that kind of sets up the theme of the show, right? Is the sense that you have this Rose family who's coming into this long-standing community that for year after year after year has done the same thing the same way. And then you come in, you have these outsiders who come in who want to do it a new way, but yet they also come to appreciate and embrace some of the traditions of the community of Schitt's Creek that have been around for years, right? And so it's this kind of dance between something new, something old. How do we honor tradition? How do we move forward, though, while honoring tradition, right? I love the idea that David's going to open a general store and it becomes an apothecary, right? I mean, which is not what you would think of, or I might have said that wrong, but you all know what I mean, right? When he first says the town needs a general store, in that town, that's not what you think he means. But so I think it opens that idea up. I think a lot of kind of the underlying theme, one of the underlying themes of the show is how do tradition and new ideas and all of that kind of meld together to form community.
And I think we see that. Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, and so in that too, there's a belligerence both from the town council and from Johnny Rose. The change doesn't happen through collaboration or meeting on equal grounds or diffusion. It's very much from friction. And I didn't remember that episode when I watched the final season. And here's a spoiler for you: as they leave the town, Roland has changed the sign. That his grandfather now has the face of Moira, and his grandmother or great aunt now has the face of Johnny Rose, which I thought was a wonderful nod to church unity.
Yeah. I think it's lovely, and I love that last week when we had Aaron on, just kind of bookending this thing, that your favorite is this really kind of like, how do we embody, or your episode embodies what does it mean to hold tenderly tradition and vision. And Aaron's favorite episode is the the one where they come back. Danny, was the one that you also named it.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, the happy anniversary where they come to the table and they say, where Roland stands up for Schitt's Creek and is like, this is our home. This is who our people are now. And
Right.
and that's it, within the first 3 seasons, you see this really beautiful shifting change. And what I really like about Schitt's Creek, and another thing that I think is useful to the church today, is that it models faithfully how to continuously evaluate where you are in the present so that you can move forward into this vision that you have kind of communally cast, right? That like part of the work that we are called to do is to be reflective of where we are, our context, both personally, kind of a social location way. And I think the church often forgets to do that, right? And that's how we get into these spaces of stagnation, that we don't necessarily, we are the townspeople at the beginning of who are these outsiders coming in trying to change our signs, trying to change our ways, and yet if we listen to them, are we not better people for it?
Right.
So my question, I guess, in that is, what do we need to do as faith leaders to kind of model that hospitality that Schitt's Creek models so well in our worship spaces?
And it's probably, well, it is a coincidence, but it may not be, that I think that episode, the happy anniversary episode, Stephanie, that you talked about, the conversion kind of takes place around a table over a meal, right? Where the Roses, Johnny and Moira, are sitting there with Don and Bev, their former wealthy friends, who just kind of left them, right, when things went south for them. And then they realize that Roland and Jocelyn are the real sort of rocks in their life. And they're the, Roland and Jocelyn, although they don't have much in the way of finances, or even much to, they're the really generous ones at the table, right? So they're sort of, I think that is the episode where both Johnny and Moira kind of become converts to Schitt's Creek, right? To say,
They become
okay, these are our,
They what?
they become citizens, yeah.
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 Ooh, that's a citizen. That's interesting.
So maybe as faith, well, to answer, maybe as faith leaders, I mean, I think it's, I mean, we always say this, but it's creating space where these kind of conversations, and, you know, I think we rush to jump, we sometimes rush to jump in the middle and play referee, right, between tradition and vision and figuring out, rather than creating space to see how tradition can inform vision, right? And to say, listen, it comes down to relationship, right? I mean, you definitely, once that relationship is established between Roland and Jocelyn and Moira and Johnny, you see that's really, to me, where, well, a lot of the things in the show that we love, the transformation happens through relationship.
Absolutely. So I have a question that kind of, I guess, relates to that. Well, no, I'm going to go back. What are you talking about?
I know, just you're very thoughtfully listening, and you're engaged in this conversation, and you're dressed as Dr. Clara Mandrake, and it's just kind of cracking me up. I'm sorry.
We must put down our cause. Our cause. There's your cause.
I feel like I'm sitting here with Dr. Clara Mandrake. I mean,
my whole life has been trying to be Catherine O'Hara. So
at this point, it's almost impossible to separate the two of you. So
all I ask. So as I was kind of doing a little bit of research for this week, I realized that the pilot episode of this show is called "Our Cup Runneth Over," which I think is a really interesting kind of dichotomy of how we meet the Roses, right? Like, they are getting everything taken from them. It's not a generally, we think, or at least I think of, when we think of cup runneth over, there's a lot of grace and abundance, and but abundance in a way that is shared, right? Like, our cup runneth over with the love and hospitality and all the things that we use in church world. And yet, this is when they're like, our cup runneth over, they're meaning that they had too much, things needed to be taken and scaled back. And for them to find out who they're really kind of meant to be at the end of the series, right? So what, I guess with that context, what are ways in which maybe we need to scale back so that we can grow? And I mean this I'm not asking for, you need to speak to your own personal context, you can, but I mean this in like, church writ large, people of faith writ large. Where do we need to scale back in order to find new spaces to thrive?
Well, I think in general, and I think some of this has happened during COVID, like in the midst of a global pandemic, right, is that as we've been kind of forced out of our buildings, as we've been forced to think about how we do church in a new way. I mean, some of the trappings of church have already been stripped away from us, right? And so, we've had time to reconnect with family. We've had time maybe to reconnect with friends. I mean, I think as you see them sitting there, I mean, you see people who are biologically family, but are really four strangers, right? They don't know each other. And so they're in this grand palace of a home. And, one of the images that came to my mind is how many churches, how many faith communities out there have been sitting in grand palaces that are simply strangers to one another, right? They come, they show up.
That's a word.
They leave. I mean, they're just strangers and strangers to their community too. Johnny.
So I have this theory about the church. I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Danny? I apologize.
No, go ahead. I didn't know if I was supposed to call on you. I don't know how this.
No. So here's what happens: is I get excited and
I'm not the host. I don't know why I called on you. Go ahead. You speak anytime you want to.
I make 3/4 of a point and kind of trail off, and then there's an awkward pause, and Spiff asks another question. But it's So I have this theory about the 1960s church, okay? So we had the baby boom, and we had the big suburban explosion, right? And they started building churches, but they built the churches optimistically on this baby boom. So all of these churches built in the 60s have these education buildings attached to them with like 20 classrooms. And I don't think they've ever been filled. And the sanctuary can seat like 500 people, but I don't think it ever had 500 people in it. I think that was them being like, we have 300 right now, let's aim for 500, right? And we have 8 classes right now, let's aim for 15. But instead what happened is that we never hit 500. So then even red letter days look kind of awful, or they feel awful because, well, we had 350, but we were hoping for 500. Or wow, we saw,
right.
And it's perspective. And so with our cup runneth over in that enormous house, certainly I wonder what would happen if churches all had to move into buildings that made them feel full. Like what would happen if my church with 130 people in it had a sanctuary that seated 150?
Right.
Instead of, because I think COVID has put every single mainline church, every single disciples church as the residents of Schitt Creek. Or rather, they've kind of shoved us into the motel there. And I don't know what that means. Like, it's almost like limbo. We have to or purgatory, we have to process, and I'm not Catholic.
Yeah. Well, and I think we invented fall kickoff Sunday, right, for education to try to get 500 people in the education wing, right? We invented fake church days to get people in. And that's a good.
You want a certificate.
Right. Hey, come get your Bible and get ready for school. I mean, I think that's a good question, right? In a way, I think the church right now is kind of like the Rose family. The first time, we've kind of moved. What happens when you lose a sense of place, right? We tend to assign God dwelling in a particular place at a particular hour, right? As if God can only show up at a particular address at 11 o'clock on Sunday. And, and I think as clergy and many lately, we've talked about, that's not true. And we need to be out in the community and we need to go where the people are and we need to engage with the community. But we really honestly haven't changed much about our practices, right? We still gather in our palaces at the same time every week and just wonder why is no one else coming? So, but now we've kind of, when you lose your sense of place, what struggles does that entail, and what questions does that force you to ask? Obviously, I think if the Rose family had not lost everything, had not been forced to move, they definitely would not have become the people they ended up becoming, right? They would still be kind of these snooty, narcissistic people that you don't like.
Not much of a market for big portraits of other people's families.
I don't know if you buy one.
That's one of my favorite lines from Stevie
So
Budd. It's
Stevie's
such a
But yes,
right.
So maybe there's change that gets prompted. I mean, all change is prompted by a circumstance. Pardon.
Yeah, no. I think that all change is prompted. I like it. I like that it goes back to that it's the friction. It's part of the friction, right? That's the catalyst.
Well, and we expect the feeling with the mainline church. I'll just say it, the feeling with the disciples sometimes is we want change with as much smoothness as possible. Like we don't want any friction, or we want as minimal. Oh, I froze at the perfect time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I froze. Here I am.
I thought it was so profound that there we go. You're back.
We want it without friction, without pause, without problem or controversy.
Right.
I'm also going to freak you all out. Ready? Watch this. I feel like I'm taking off a mask. Okay. So Herb
It'd be weirder if I like wigged.
Yes.
So
Herb Ertlinger. Oh no.
Herb Ertlinger.
Okay.
Wine guy.
So I guess this is about beginnings and endings, really. This is where all of my questions are this week. I have 2 Post-it notes. Herbert Linger, it starts with, what is it, the Day of Wine and Roses? And it's the most brilliant, Moira is drafted to do a commercial, and it's just Catherine O'Hara. Like, she is probably the finest living comedian. She's probably one of the finest living comedians of any gender identity, period. But she's wonderful. 6 seasons later, they're going to Herb Ertlinger to drink his horrible wine to try to find it for David's wedding. And they get just schnookered on it, combining it and having fun and everything else. No.
It's not for his wedding. It's that he's going to name a rosé. It's Moira Rosé.
That's right.
He's going to name a wine after. He's going to name a wine after Moira because she come back into clearly the croning is influencing all people.
Yeah. So
the Crow is 3.
Instead of you're right, and that changes the trajectory because now she's actually the star she wanted to be in season 1, and she's so much it's the opposite of eating crow. And please pardon the pun, but it's an intentional one. I don't know what that is, right? I guess it's just humility. What does it mean? What does it mean, the 2 different wineries? How is that? We talk about old wineskins and new wine. What does it mean to have such new wine, but to be able to address it differently?
Well, she's having both episodes highlight. I mean, you're right. She's one of the greatest living comedians of any gender, I think, because you can see both those episodes are really about her, Catherine O'Hara as an actress, and her just getting to be Moira, to the hilt. The thing, the first when she's shooting the commercial and they're in the trailer, it's kind of a miserable experience all around, right? I mean, Herb's not having any fun. Moira's not having any fun. Johnny, I think they send Johnny home. Yeah. I mean, but yet when they somehow come back and her and David the wine's terrible, right? But they don't care. They're just having this mother-son moment, right? They're having a great time. They're driving Herb crazy, which is great to see him get frustrated. They are having so much fun. And so once again, there's this pure joy. Same situation, right? Kind of a winery that, they would not have been drinking this wine in their previous life, and they're still holding on to that, right? In the early episode, but here they're just kind of letting go, right? And so it's kind of, it is kind of old wine in the sense they've had this wine before, but it's definitely a new wineskin, right? They're more comfortable in their own skin, just having fun. and experiencing joy together.
And they like the wine and not the label. So
And
They like the wine and not the label.
how much of that is because they've had to eat together in close proximity, and they've had to live together in close proximity, and they've had to be like, it's
Right.
you talked about earlier with place, and I think place has such an important part in the church. I don't know about y'all, actually I can probably guess, but I've been struggling with the whole like, we're an incarnational relational movement that cannot incarnate with one another right now,
Right.
or at least we can't physically do so. You
or
know,
at least we should.
we shouldn't. And having to work out with like our reopening team, you know, worship's the last thing we're going back to. Fellowship meals are the second to last thing we're going back to, because that's where the danger lies. But
right.
Without that closeness, that's where, well, and we see that disconnect. Okay, Spiff, do you have a question? Because I have like 5 more.
I do.
Okay, of course you do.
And
You're just prepared.
it's going on. Well, first of all, you know, I think the call to meal together is a thing that we need to like kind of name for them, and it's transformational in lots of different ways. Not only in the, you know, the one table that is in Johnny and Moira's room, but there's also the one booth at Cafe Tropical. You know, like there's a lot of that coming together. But my next question really is. More so my favorite episode is Patrick's birthday episode, the surprise party episode. Makes me cry. I was unprepared for how moved I was the first time I watched it, because you know it's a funny and heartfelt show, but this episode for me had just moments that moved me beyond it just moved me in ways that I was unexpected. So, and one of the most poignant moments I think of this entire series is you're set up to kind of understand that Patrick's parents don't know about David and Patrick as a couple. They know of them as business partners. And so my question is twofold. What does the church need to be more explicit about that we assume everyone knows? And because I think that's part of the problem, right? David's like, of course they know about me. They call the store all the time. And like, what do they think I am? Just his business partner? And then it's like, come to find out, yes. So what are we not saying explicitly that would fundamentally change the way people might view us as Christians? And my second question after that is, and I think they're related, which is why I'm posing them together, is what, as faith leaders, as the three of us who lead congregations, how do we posture ourselves in the way that Patrick's parents do in a, why did he not tell us? Like, what did we do to make our space one that felt like he couldn't tell us, couldn't be open about his full self? How do we as faith leaders need to reposture, reposition our communities, our own leadership models, so that we are a space in which all of our people feel showing up authentically to each of us in a way that helps the whole community feel seen and valued?
Well, it could be too. I think because of fear, we are sometimes, and probably too often, intentionally vague. Right? I mean, I think in this, you've got a lot of assumptive dynamics going on here. You know, David assuming they know they're a couple, and then there's this assumption that Patrick's parents might not take it very well, and you know, and then kind of you can see the pain in Patrick's parents when they kind of discover this, and they're like, well, why couldn't our son tell us, or why didn't he feel safe telling us? And so I think because of fear, we're intentionally vague and saying, okay, people will figure this out, right? That if you're gay, lesbian, transgender, or the other way, you know, there's an assumption in many communities, I won't be welcome in your church, or they're surprised when they're welcomed. And so, you know, I think when we are vague, we cause far more pain and far more hurt than we do when we are intentional about saying God loves everybody. I mean, intentional about saying you were welcome here. And so there's this kind of this You know, and I think a lot of, you know, and this happens in every mainline church, happens in the disciples church. It's like, well, we'll just sort of not put it out there and people will just kind of figure it out, right? We'll preach the gospel. We'll use words if necessary. You know, we love disciples. We love that St. Francis of Assisi quote, right? It ought to probably be on the chalice somewhere. We love it so much. And it's a good, but sometimes we need to use words. We need to be intentional, right? Because in the, that's what I love that episode too. But what's so hard to watch about it is most of that pain pretty much it could have been mitigated if people had just been intentional about saying where they were, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I thought was beautiful about it, I'm somebody who's come out. By the way, my coming out story is I told my mom and she goes, yeah. And my dad was like, okay, what do you want for dinner? That was like the length and breadth of my, yeah. Because my mom also made sure she told me like her best friend in college was gay. Like the second I turned 13, she was like, yeah, my best friend in college was gay. Do you want to watch Will and Grace with me? So I think she knew.
Shout out to good parenting.
Yeah, shout out.
What did you have for dinner that night? What was the?
I think so. My dad and I would make frozen pizza every Thursday night. We'd just throw one in on the pan that never left the oven. Yeah. Anyhow, I don't know why he asked. Maybe it was like pepperoni versus supreme. The point with it is the narrative that gets, you know, I mean, I don't know a lot of gays or lesbians or people who are non-heteronormative that haven't struggled at some point with there's something wrong with me because of how I am. And there's not. But it's even if it's not clearly said, even if it's not like beaten into their head, you get that feeling. And there's also that like I'm failing my parents by not being straight. I'm failing my community by not, and like all of this, it's obviously much worse if it's overtly said, if it's so like it was interesting in this world where homophobia is not a thing, where it's intentionally crafted, that internalized dislike, that internalized shame still exists. I've been thinking about that since last week, because what does it mean that it like, why are Patrick's parents like that if there's not homophobia in this world?
Shout out to you getting a bunch of thumbs up right now. And I want to just name, sorry, I'm not on my phone, but I am reading comments from people who are watching, we have people that are like, you know, Church Clarity. So shout out to George McHale and Church Clarity. And the that's not who spoke, but there's Trevor James Allen is saying that how he found, who's one of my congregants who came to the park because of Church Clarity, found us on Church Clarity, and the kind of the holiness of transparency, right? Of being explicit and saying, hey, you and your husband are welcome not only to come and sit and view worship, but to be active participants in the love and grace of Christ. And I think that we need to say that more explicitly and openly, because when we don't, it becomes, you know, silence is the side of the oppressor, right? And so you can assume, there's an assumption there that those spaces don't hold value for those that are not, that may lie outside of the hegemony of the community.
You can do more than boost our attendance numbers and write checks.
Yeah.
So Moira serving on the town council.
Okay.
That is the community shifting to allow someone in her fullness to participate, someone in her fullness changing the town. Is that a fair thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Congregations, what's the best way for congregations to build leaders that are outside of their regular arena? How do we get off the carousel of, I was stewardship chair, now I'm hospitality chair, now I'm fellowship chair, now I'm board chair, now I'm an elder, now I'm a stewardship chair, now I'm an elder.
We're just rotating positions.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good, I do want to say something about, just back to Schitt's Creek is an open and affirming town, right?
Yep.
It's more welcoming. That is what, that town, right? What a small rural town, it was so welcoming, right? There was never a moment where you felt, they supported the store. There was never a moment where you felt like they tried to marginalize Patrick and David, right? I think the church in that can learn a lot from Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I mean that was an intentional thing. Dan Levy refused to have an episode in which like they had to struggle with him being who he was. Like he just like there's no homophobia in that world. Period.
Or when
Right.
Moira comes to when she's running for council and she Ronnie hosts it and she assumes it's a bunch of lesbians, but it's really women business owners.
Yep. Well, and the town allowed. I mean, that goes to the point, Arthur. The question you ask is: the town allowed and encouraged people to flourish as they were, and allowed them to be who they are, to use their gifts, right? To not fit into this mold of, right, okay, this is what the stewardship chair's always done and been like, and this is what the elder, it's like, let's listen and let you use your gifts. I mean, I think it's one of the very first town council meetings Moira is at, and they're talking about aftercare for children. And Moira just kind of takes over, and she's doing what's right. I mean, the town is, you see Ron and Roland, they're like, well, we don't have any money. We don't. And Moira's like, let's do it. Let's do it. Right. And so I think to allow leaders to flourish, we have to create environments where people can bring their gifts and bring who they are. I mean, and really be willing to listen. And that's kind of a culture environment that, it's not, how often do we get very talented people who come into the life of the church and they want to use their gifts, and then we say, well, if you want to use them, you've got to fit into this kind of narrow role, right? Or this is the way we do things.
Absolutely.
And never in Schitt's Creek. I mean, there are moments of it, but at the end of the day, there is always, I mean, the Rose family flourishes because of the people of Schitt's Creek. They have created an environment where they can flourish and become who God has created them to be.
Absolutely. When you were, one of my questions here, and it doesn't need to be a question, but like part of it is like, what do we do with non-traditional spiritual gifts, like trend forecasting? Because we have been kind of conditioned to understand what, how long you have to serve in one church before you're allowed to move to another, before you're allowed to serve a big pulpit. I can't tell you the amount of people that, because I am second career, but so when they find out when I graduated seminary and that my first call was as an executive minister, that they're like, well, how'd you pull that off? And it's like, well, no, because my gifts match the needs of a community. I'm really grateful to serve a community that said, here are the gifts that we need. Here are the gifts we see in you that are non-traditional gifts in certain ways, right? Like I have a background in marketing and branding for theatrical movies. So, but to see that as
it's why our Instagram games are so good. It's why our marketing is so excellent. It's why you should totally engage us on Instagram, everybody who's watching this, and teach me how.
But this is I will teach you one day. The minute I have a minute. But so what do we do when someone says, my spiritual gift is trend forecasting, and not only do we not know as a church how to define that, but how to utilize it to the fullness and holiness that it was created to be. We are one writ large to say, that's not a gift that we necessarily see functioning here, right? And so I think to Danny's point is that like part of it is a dissemination of our own authority and understanding of our positions as leaders, so that it allows for those spaces to say, I don't have that gift. Come on in, show me what that means, but it's a humility and a lack of hubris that's just like to be able to say, come in with your gifts that seem antithetical or non-traditional or whatever it looks like to this community, and not only are we be grateful to share them, but to allow them to function, especially if they function against the grain of what we have kind of done traditionally.
Right. Yeah, I mean I think that's important, right? I mean, that especially now as we think about what the church is going to look like in the future, right? Where I think clergy, like we sometimes, like I'm second career too. And so people they're like, oh, you've only been doing this for so many years, right? And the church that we were trained in seminary to lead, no matter when you graduated from seminary now, doesn't exist anymore. Right? So nothing you learn. So we're all kind of on, and in many ways, the context in which churches and lay leaders have been trained to serve in, those don't exist anymore either. And so if there was any time, and it's past time, but definitely now as the church moves forward, I don't think we can put any sort of gift, any sort of experience in a bucket. I mean, it's not a bad thing for people to bring experience in from 20 years in marketing into the life of the church, right? Whether that's clergy, lay people, I mean, whatever. I mean, I think we have to expand our idea of what gifts are needed, what roles are needed in the church so that we can be, and that's part of the biblical story, right? Is the expansion of what the church needed and the gifts and the, it's not a static thing.
None of the lists in the letters are comprehensive, not a single one. And one of my favorite, it's David Fitch, Faithful Presence, 7, it's a church leadership book. But he talks about fivefold gifting, and he uses that Ephesians 4 passage of apostles, prophets, pastors, teachers, and evangelists. But he defines them so weirdly. And it's like, so, and by the way, Spiff, trend forecasting makes you a digital prophet. There you go.
I mean, I'm here for it.
Yeah, it's a, music isn't a spiritual gift in Scripture, but tell that to any of the really great lay musicians who offer their gifts every week in your worship service, right? We absolutely make exceptions, except when it's stuff we don't understand and it's stuff we fear, which I think is this will be my last question. Schitt's Creek is set in a world as it can be, not in a world as it is, with absolute refusal to engage in homophobia. The church is called to not be afraid. 365 days, though I don't think that's actually true, like the 365 references thing. Is that true? Send us an email, 2on1project@gmail.com. I don't think it is. But we're really good at living in fear. What does the church look like if we just refuse to do that, if we live into the world we hope for, not the world we're afraid of?
Is God's kingdom too easy of an answer? That's probably too easy of an answer.
I think it's a really big question, and I thought it was kind of unfair the second it came out of my mouth. But God's kingdom, okay.
I mean, I have a question here.
I think everything we aspire to in the church and our prayers and our meetings, everything God aspires us to be, it comes down to doing exactly, Arthur, what you just said. I mean, that's what we got to let go of all that, right? I mean, we pray for it. We pray for it in our corporate worship and our personal lives and, our meetings, like every church meeting we're in, we pray for God's kingdom to be among us, right? And then we spend the next 2 hours making decisions that completely prevent God's kingdom from being among us, right?
Yeah.
It's just getting past that. I think we're afraid. We're afraid to really become who God calls us to be in many ways.
That's also a word.
Yeah. No,
I
I like that, and thank you. This is kind of where every week I work out my own struggles with Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, and also just ecclesiology. So thank you. That's been incredibly helpful, Danny.
Well, friends, I think we need to move into our final question.
Oh, here, let me play the theme song Travis hasn't written for that yet. We do that every week. We harass our friend Travis Smith McKee.
So Danny, as our guest, and thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a wonderful conversation. You get to answer first. So what biblical character, theme, book, story, anything are you most reminded of in Schitt's Creek?
Ooh. Well, I kind of have two. One's actually not, but a biblical book. Maybe it should be. There should be a letter to the Schittians. Somewhere around there is.
Yeah.
Or some of the letters.
Well, no, that's
right.
That's the pastorals. The Schittian.
Yes. We're not sure if Paul wrote it or not. But there is kind of like this letter of, you see a community of people working it out and trying to figure out what it means to be who God's created them to be and what it means to be community together, right? The whole series kind of plays like that. And so I've always thought this would be a good letter here. Or the other one, I mean, there's so many. I do think of Luke 12, right, where you have the parable of the rich fool, where the only parable where God directly intervenes and God kind of demands, he's talking about building bigger barns, and God says, if your life was demanded of you this very night, how would this go? And I feel like that's kind of the opening episode of Schitt's Creek, right? They're losing everything, right? Their lives have been demanded of them. And so they kind of begin living into this parable where they have to figure out what it means to live with all this stuff and without this money, and that, they have to discover that it's love that is the true intention of life, not the pursuit of money, or not the things that they thought that gave them life don't. And the things they've not pursued are the things that actually give them life. And so every time I kind of go back and watch that first episode, Luke 12, kind of that parable of the rich fool kind of jumps in for me.
That was not where I was going to go, and I'll go after. But as you were saying that, I was just like, literally more is the crowing, where it's, you got to, I don't want to caw, but it's, we've got to put down our cause and pick up our cause.
Right. Go ahead and call. I mean, I think that's fine. Go ahead and you can give us a call. I just mean
like, like the roses at the beginning have to put down their cause, their whining, their frustrations and all of that, and pick up the actual cause, which is to be community, to find family again within themselves.
Right.
As you were just speaking that. But that is not where I was going this week. Arthur, do you want to go, or you want me to go?
I can go. I can go. I just want to say that.
Okay.
Oh no, you want to go? That's fine.
Sure. Okay. So my answer to the final question is, Schitt's Creek as a town is a metaphor for the table, in which all are welcome, all are present. If we are living fully into, you are all welcome. So as I was like, this is what?
Authentic relationship.
Authentic relationship is what the table is all about. It's got sacrifice, it's got love, it has grace, and it is all functioning, and you are all welcome. Even if you may get a side eye, right? You're going to be served, you're going to be fed, you're going to be community. So Schitt's Creek writ large for me is a real, like, as a full series is the table. I also thought that Twyla is Theophilus from Luke, because she's kind of hiding behind this money and thing, but she's writing the gospel in a way that makes it accessible to everyone, and only in the end do you really find out who she is, but that she is funding. She could have, she's got the money to write the story, and yet lets the story play out in real time for the good of the whole, which I think is that. And then I also did David as Zephaniah, because there's a deconstruction of what is happening. I know, I went deep this week. It's a deconstruction to joy narrative, right? He's got that, Zephaniah is the kind of understanding that is where the DSC rays can come from, which is a story that starts in a deconstruction of, and kind of a dishevelment of community and society and self that inevitably moves into a space of joy. And I really see that for David as he is, in that first episode, just lost and like, I don't know what's happening. And then in the end, decides to stay in the town when presented the opportunity to leave, because such joy has been found there. So those are my answers. Arthur, you're up.
I'm going to stick by Alexis as the Holy Spirit. I've really kind of thought about that this week. And and Danny, I don't know if you had heard my argument last week, but
it was good.
Yeah, and I just see the Spirit just being like, and walking away, and that's fine. Yeah, and just doing her thing. And also, maybe I've prayed to the Spirit that she's a cute, huge yacht. I don't know. Still my favorite line. I'm gonna suggest that David is Thomas in the Gospel of John, but David is Thomas as the twin, because there's a lot of the weird, like the outsider stuff that says Thomas is either the twin of Jesus or Thomas is meant to stand in for us. And I think that David, more than any other character, experiences salvation, saved from and saved for. And I identify with David, but I also aspire to David. And like, I was trying to be like, David's the church or David's Jesus. And I realized David's probably the twin. David is what we should hope to see in ourselves. Not the same, but something. Moira, I'm going to say is Samson, not the actual story, but there's something important about we never see her without her wig on. There's never the loss of hair, and there's never the loss of strength. And I just liked that hair is strength. I love that she had a spreadsheet. I loved everything about when the doors opened at the wedding and she was in the long wig that we had never seen and all white, and it was just she never.
If anyone wants to get married out there, I will don the gold gloves, the full white. Like I'm so into that look.
I will totally sing "You're Simply the Best" at your reception. Fly us out.
Right.
And finally, Johnny is Johnny the Baptist. Since last week, because Johnny's supposed to be the main character in the show. He's ostensibly played by the most famous actor. It starts as a show about Johnny, and more it decreases, but it's done so graciously, and it's done so thoughtfully, and it's done so lovingly, and he must decrease so that the others must increase. And it's just, there's the passing of the torch with Dan being like, you got to trust me on the show. There's just, I'm a big fan of Eugene Levy. I'm a bigger fan of Catherine O'Hara, but that does conclude things for us this week. So once again, Reverend Danny Gulden, thank you so very much. You can find Danny online at dannygulden.com. But that is the end of our Schitt's Creek run. We, of course, will come back to Schitt's Creek. We have to. Spiff has the costume made. Like, this is probably an annual thing.
I have multiple Schitt's Creek character costumes. I have a full David one too. So
I'm going to work on my Alexis costume. You think I'm kidding, but I'm not.
I don't think you're kidding.
We can make a spreadsheet and keep track of them.
We are going to be back next week at a regular time of 1 Eastern, 12 Central. Thank you for accommodating us this week, Danny. I not only had class this week, but I had a funeral suddenly pop up. So we're glad this has happened. Spiff, who's our guest next week?
Next week, we are with the Reverend Catherine Wright doing Gilmore Girls.
Oh.
And then here's the big announcement. We have Politico October coming up. And our 4 guests for October, as we kind of put a lens of why politics matter for the church and the relationship they're in. Week 1 is with Reverend Kaji Dosha.
I know who works with her.
And then we have the Reverend Dr. Lori Walk. Then we have the Reverend Jamie Plunkett, and then we have the Reverend Dr. Amy Butler. And so it's a great lineup coming up. But you can be one of those people, so hit us up. Let us know. We have some great things coming up. You get to pick the topic. Let us know what you want. Come on over. So look forward to seeing you all.
So once again, Danny, thank you 1,000 times. Dr. Clara Mandrake, thank you for leaving your nest, and wish you the best in what's coming up.
Like, I feel like I need to show, like, it's in pockets down below too. I have loose feathers everywhere in my house.
Everyone needs to download Interflix so they can watch Clara's movie.
Well, as I'll tweet you on the Facebook, as they say. So thank you very much. I'm going to end our live stream, and we'll see you next week, y'all.
Bye, everyone.
I'm going to stop the recording. We'll see you next week.